Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. As most of you might know from the previous video, the Miata has a blown engine. That's why I got it so cheap. Now luckily I was able to source a new engine, but I have never replaced an engine in my life. So this is a first for me. So let's get to it. Starting off, after looking at a lot of videos, I started by taking out the actual coolant, and that's kind of easy to access. You simply take off the bottom pans and you're able to access the drain plug right in the middle of the radiator. So using a Phillips, I just unscrewed the drain plug and popped it right off. Now in order to get the coolant to drain a bit faster, I took off the coolant valve at the top, and you can see it just pours right out. Once that was done, I could take the airbox out and the air intake completely, but you'll see as I'm taking it out, I ensured to put back all the bolts and nuts where they came from. That way, when I come to reassembling the engine, I won't lose any of my nuts and bolts. Sure, I could put them in bags and label them, but I found this to be a bit of an easier way for me to kind of track it all down. Once I got that out, I could now access the two bolts at the back of the radiator and slide the radiator out from the top. It does get snagged a little bit, so you kind of have to wiggle it and be kind of careful because the radiator's got plastic reservoir tanks and you don't want to break those when taking it out. Once I had that disconnected, I could start undoing some of the electrical plugs for things such as the alternator, the starter motor, and just the ignitions at the top. And as I was doing this, I was kind of labeling them, taking some masking tape and labeling them to kind of track where they have to be. Now, lucky for me with the new engine is that it actually came with a harness attached, and they simply cut it off at the body, so I could actually use that as reference for putting it back in and just swap out the plugs as I'm going along. That's definitely going to make my life a little bit easier. Now at this point I started to struggle a bit because I wanted to take off the exhaust from the exhaust manifold, and even though I was trying to access it from this side, it just wasn't budging. Some of the nuts were just that corroded that I couldn't get it off, so before I could get to them, I tried to take off the heat shield and it wouldn't come off 3 of the bolts. So I had to resort to cutting them off. I know it's not ideal, but because I'm not reusing this exhaust manifold, it didn't really matter. And I was able to just kind of grind them off and get the heat shield out of the way. That way I was able to access more of the exhaust manifold. Once that was off and out of the way, I would definitely recommend, if you're doing this, to spray everything down with WD-40 and let it soak for a couple of hours before trying to break any of the bolts free. It really saved me on the second day to do that, and it made a lot of the bolts a lot easier to break free on the second day. Once I had the exhaust free, I could then get underneath the car and start breaking the actual gearbox bolts free. Now, a lot of people would recommend taking out the gearbox with the engine, but simply because I didn't have the space, I had to take the alternative of taking out the engine but leaving the gearbox behind. One, it's less fluid to drain, but it is a bit more difficult to kind of get it in and out, simply because of how tight of a space it is to get to the last couple of bolts at the top of the bow housing. So the bow housing has a total of 8 bolts and then 3 bolts around the starter motor, and a lot of people forget about that 3rd bolt on the starter motor, which will hold it all together. I did as well until I found it. It was quite easy to kind of just break them free from underneath if you lift the car up high enough, and then once you've broken them free, you could kind of use your fingers to kind of just unscrew them, especially the 2 bolts at the top of the bow housing at the back of the engine. I found it was easier to get to those by taking off the ignition packs and their actual distributors. That way I could have a little bit more room between the firewall and the engine to break those bolts free and get them out. Once I had all of those off and disconnected, I could hook up the engine crane and slowly start taking off some of the weight from the gearbox. Make sure to support your gearbox as well underneath, and you could also raise it as you are raising the engine slightly to get a better angle at sliding it in and out. Once I've raised it enough, you can see that I've managed to disconnect it and it popped right off, and here we go, engine is out. Now I've got to put everything back together. I already got the engine in. Unfortunately my camera died during that phase, but in the next video you'll definitely see me connecting everything back up with the engine in. It did take 3 of us to get it back in, simply because of the guiding bolts that has to go into the bell housing. And sometimes you just need a little bit of extra manpower to kind of get the engine twisted in the right way so it slides back in. But overall, it's not that hard of a job. It took me roughly a day and a half to do on my own to get it out, and putting the new one back in, connecting it to the bell housing, was probably about an hour with 3 of us. So if you're going to do this, definitely get some of your mates to help out. It will make your life a lot easier. Well, if you guys have any questions, drop it down below. I'll try my best to answer it, and then I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.